Today, I have Reverend Carol Saunders on the show. After a 20-year career as an engineer for an energy company, Reverend Carol Saunders followed the call of spirit and became a double-ordained unity and interfaith minister. She founded and led a church in Deerfield, Illinois for 10 years, and more recently transformed her ministry to the Spiritual Forum podcast, prayer and retreat ministry. Carol now hosts the weekly Spiritual Forum podcast, where she brings hope and inspiration to the world through engaging conversations on a wide range of spiritual topics. She also leads an annual Hope Planet spirituality retreat at Unity Village, focused on co-creating a world that works for all beings on the planet. And I think we're going to talk about that today. Carol's message is centered on awakening to our divine nature. This process includes identifying and releasing layers of cultural conditioning, healing from individual and collective trauma, and reclaiming our innocence. She is a champion for all animals and believes it's essential to include them in our circle of compassion and the golden rule. Welcome to the program, Carol.
Thank you, Marla. It's so fun to be here.
Yes, I love your bio. I always think of the golden rule, Dr. Eben Alexander, talking about how it's not something that we made up, but it's interwoven into the fabric of the universe. I talk about that a lot on my podcast. And so let's just jump right in. We're going to talk about innocence today, and two areas that we're going to touch upon, I think, or I know, are animals and also, of course, children, my passions, both of those. So tell us a little bit about in your journey. I know we all love, or most people, I can't even say most people, I would hope to think love animals. I have my little Labradoodle sitting here right now. And this is a great time for this topic because we just had 4th of July. And all I could think about is, my puppy, I sat in the closet and covered her ears with a bowl of popcorn. But anyway, and thinking about the wildlife. But anyway, this is our conversation, so I want you to chat. So tell us a little bit how you got, you began speaking about animals and in a spiritual sense, and how we need to really awaken more to who they are as spiritual beings.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with what you initially talked about, with the golden rule being in the fabric of our universe. I think it is the one law. It is the singular law that if we live by that law, we would not have any of the crime, war, abuse. We'd have nothing. We'd be living in peace and harmony. It's just so interesting, though, how we manage to, if we live it at all, which most of us struggle.
Yes.
Most of us struggle. People have, we're always talking about other people. Even when we're gossip, we're not living the golden rule. When we're thinking bad thoughts about others, we're not living the golden rule. When we're trying to cheat or get ahead, we're not living the golden rule. But we typically draw the line for the golden rule between the human and non-human animal species boundary. And I believe that is 100% cultural conditioning. I think that is something that we've learned. I don't think there's anything natural about anything that we do against the animal kingdom, any of it. Of course, we love our animals. We love our pets. We call them animals. Some people call them animal companions. I've got 2 dogs. I've got 3 cats. I also was somewhat traumatized by the 4th of July, although I was lucky my dogs aren't bothered by it. But I do concern myself with the deer and all of the animals that are around me, geese, all of that. But the thing that's very invisible to us is like how we eat and what we use for entertainment and what we wear. It's so ingrained in our society that using animals in that way is okay, but having our pets, our mice, our cats, our dogs, our gerbils, whatever they are, guinea pigs, our fish, that's kind of a separate thing. And I kind of grew up questioning all this even when I was young. I was one of those kind of tender hearts that cared about all the animals. I didn't like people killing bugs, or I didn't like any harm to animals that's happening. And yet I was completely invisible to the roast that my mom cooked. I was completely invisible to the chicken casserole or whatever it is. Completely didn't even think about that. But by the time I was 15 years old, I said to my parents, no more. I'm not going to eat meat anymore. And so I was on that journey for a while, but I really kind of disconnected with the plight of the animals in that world. And I even went into, I had my engineering career, and I went to my spiritual career. And it wasn't until I found a book called Dominion by Matthew Scully that he completely woke me up to, wow, our world, our culture, we are systematically harming animals. And why would we do this? He's a Catholic, and he wrote kind of from a Catholic perspective. And so I think, why do we do this? And so I kind of woke up and started getting on I wouldn't call it a soapbox, but I started thinking about, this is really a part of spirituality, waking up to cultural conditioning, seeing how I'm out of alignment, how am I out of alignment with the golden rule? And there are many, many ways that I am, as are others, but I can really only do something about myself. So then I really just started realizing that I had to become more of a voice as well. So I try my best to do that. It was kind of hard to do from the pulpit when I was leading a church, because it's such a controversial topic. It's so threatening to people because it's so ingrained in habit and tradition, and just what makes them feel good. And they think that you're making them wrong. So I'm still trying to perfect how to talk to people about this.
Yes, it is really a difficult topic. Well, a lot of the spiritual topics, because people are so triggered by it. And what's interesting is what's interwoven into it. It's even politics. It's
Oh, yeah.
religion. It's, all of those different things. And so what is your message to the world about how and let's talk about baby steps here, but how we can, for example, well, not for example, but on another note, I work in Ethiopia, and they don't, even their dogs and their cats, they do not have domestic animals. They're only to help guard them or whatever it may be. And it just really touches my heart, pulls at my heartstrings, because I'm like you. I'm like, that part of me is Buddhist. I have a little bit of like everything in my, so that I can't even kill a bug. I grab it and I like throw it out.
Good for you. I do too.
I just can't help it.
Yeah.
But so what is your message to people so they don't feel threatened, but they can take baby steps? And not only that, of course, being a role model for their children, because they're our future, right? So it's so important for them to maybe have a different conditioning than what most of us did.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to, not make anyone wrong. No one's wrong. We all inherited this. Every single one of us
Mm.
is, I don't like to use the word victim because it's not my favorite place to be for spirituality, but I think it kind of works. We're kind of a victim of conditioning. We all came in as children. And, when you come as a child, you're so close to God. You're all love. I mean, sure, you cry because you're uncomfortable or whatever, but there's not a child, there's not a 2-year-old or 3-year-old that would naturally go and just kill a goat
Right.
or rabbit. It's so unnatural. It's so unnatural. So we teach all of our children that we do this and this is okay. And I think this is kind of where innocence comes in. We lose our innocence through this whole process of cultural conditioning. Every single one of us learned this. So no one's wrong. No one's doing bad on purpose. It's what we've learned. I do think that when we are taught to do something that is contrary to our soul, and I do think killing the innocent is contrary to our soul, there is a little trauma that happens there. There's trauma. And I think we are all at some level very traumatized by how our collective treats the animals, because it's not aligned with the golden rule. It's not aligned with the love that we came in as. So we're kind of stepping outside of our soul in a way. And so there's a wound point there. So I think all
Mhm.
of us are wounded. And I think it's important to focus on that we're all wounded by idea, this idea that we need to exploit and harm and take the lives of animals for our own being. We don't. Now, maybe in some places you do. I don't know. I'm not there to judge whether in Alaska or Antarctica, wherever, that you have as much available as we certainly have in America. We have so much of a variety of food available to us in America. So we can make so many other choices, but we continue to make this other choice. And it really is just because we've been conditioned. So if people can start seeing, I don't want to be a robot. I don't want to be just what I was taught. I want to be able to have my own authority over my own decisions. There can be a little bit of a light, a little bit of opening in the psyche where then you can kind of talk about these kinds of things. I tend to stay away from people who are not open at all. I shouldn't say stay away from. I don't bring this topic up with people who are not open at all. But I also just kind of plant seeds, I mean, I was at the grocery store 2 days ago, and I was really proud of myself for this because it's really hard to have a voice in this area. But I saw a guy who was putting his groceries in the back of his car, and he had this shirt on and it said "Freedom for All." And I was going to the grocery store. He was, obviously loading up his car. And I just said, I'm for freedom for all too. He goes, yeah. I said, yeah, I think everyone should be free. And then I pointed to his multiple gallons of milk and I said, these cows aren't free. And he said, no, they're not. And I said, well, I don't think humans will ever be free as long as we're keeping anyone in captivity. I said, just think about that. And then I just said, have a good day. And I left. Now, did I change his mind? I'm 99.999% sure I'm not. I'm not here to change minds. I'm just here to plant seeds.
Mm. So what I hear you saying is that you promote a vegan diet because you're going back to our food a lot. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, I think I call it a vegan lifestyle because
Mhm.
veganism, people call it a diet. I don't think it is a diet. It
Right.
is the complete, I'm not going to support the entertainment when they use animals. I'm not going to support um, any exploitation of animals in any way, whether it's for product testing or food or clothes or entertainment. And you know what? I mean, I've been blind to this. So most of my life, I took my kids to SeaWorld. I took them to the zoo, went to circuses. I did all those things when I was a kid. I loved the circus. I just didn't think about, do the elephants really love it?
Mhm.
Where would they rather be? And just as if I were put up on a stage, taken from my family and put up on a stage somewhere in some strange country, even if I look like I'm having a good time, is that where my soul wants to be? No, I want to be back with my family. We all want to be with our family. So, really, I'm about keeping families intact. Really, I'm about loving all beings and freedom for everyone. Now,
Mm.
that can translate into what someone would call a vegan lifestyle, but I actually kind of prefer a spirituality that includes all beings and respect for all beings,
Mhm.
and recognizing that, I mean, I believe that God made each one of them. And I think that's what it says in Genesis, if you're into the Bible at all, whether you look at it literally or not. But God created all of the creatures,
Right.
and they all have a purpose unto themselves, not just for us. And so when people quote the Bible, it says here, it says here, it says here, there's not a lot of it. What it really says is God created this planet. And to me, whatever God is to you, some people think God is a being, some people think God is an energy. I don't want to even get into splitting those hairs, but some greater power created everything that is and said it was good. And the animals were given a vegetarian diet, and the humans, it says right there, you can have for your food all the seed-bearing plants. And so our natural diet also, at least biblically, is seed-bearing plants, so fruits and nuts and grains and whatnot. So
Mm.
so anyway, you know, that's what our bodies are meant for. I know that there'll be a lot of people who say, you know, we have the teeth of carnivores. No, we don't. We don't have the digestive tract of carnivores. We've really fallen very, very, very far away from who we are naturally. And so you asked about baby steps. All right. Baby steps is important because most people can't make that big change. So for baby steps, I'd say pick one thing, pick one day, you know, pick one thing. Maybe it's, I'm going to do Meatless Monday. You know, maybe that's a baby step. Maybe it's like, you know what, I'm not going to go to the zoo anymore. Or I'm going to learn, I'm going to learn more about the lives of those animals. That would probably be even better. I'm going to learn more about the lives of animals in captivity. Be curious. Look out and see how animals are used in the world, and maybe say, I'm not interested in doing that anymore in some way. So, you know, you start with Monday, and maybe you could go to Tuesday, or you could start with one meal, or you can start with, you know, one product or something. But if you're committed to the golden rule, then it doesn't stop at my family. It doesn't stop at my neighborhood. It doesn't stop at my state. It doesn't stop at my nation. It doesn't stop with my species. It's broad. So
Mhm.
I would say
So,
just pick something. Yeah.
right. So this, to segue a little bit, but it's all intertwined. We talk a lot on this podcast, especially with the philosophers and the researchers, about suffering, and that we choose a life before we come into this world. And many believe that most of our life is destiny, and the free will is the part where we make a decision on how to react to that, you know, to those situations. And the reasons we have suffering to learn lessons. And this is a very hard concept for humans. So I don't think we're supposed to understand it, but those in the spiritual world are trying very, very hard. So where does this come into play in terms of animals, do you think? Well, first of all, why do you think you're a minister? Why do you think we have so much suffering in this world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I used to think that we weren't really meant to suffer, that really we're meant to just be joyful, and that we've kind of messed up because we've separated from the divine, we've separated from God, we've separated from our true nature. And so that we've created what like Christians would call sin, others might call missing the mark, just living unaligned with God, and that causes suffering. I'm holding on to that idea, but I'm also kind of wondering also, do we come in intentionally to experience this suffering for the growth of the soul? I don't think we know either. So we just got to kind of pick what we want to believe. I do know the one thing I absolutely am certain of is that suffering is something we can use for growth. So that when it happens to us, when we are in the place of suffering, we have the power to transmute that. We have the power to bring that into love, and to grow and to choose love out of it, and to expand our hearts, because our hearts were hurt so deeply, but now we also have the capacity to expand it as much as we've been hurt. So that I don't know the why as much as I know the what we can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that happen over and over and over again, where people either on my podcast or in my community, people I know who've suffered horrifically. I talked to a guy yesterday on my podcast, unbelievable how much work he's done with forgiveness. And it's like so interesting how he's been able to transmute that suffering. So I do think we can use it for our good. Now, I think that we can get very, very lazy with this idea that suffering is an intended state for us so that we grow, so that when I see somebody over there suffering, I just leave them alone because, it's their karma, they chose it, and I don't want to interfere. I've heard people say things like that. No, I think that suffering being there, whether it's a squirrel or a rabbit or a bug or a human or a tree, whatever it is, I think it's in front of us so that we can transmute some of our own suffering and to choose love. So I think the choice is always, it's our free will to choose love and to
Mm,
make suffering into something much bigger and better, because I think we're here on this planet to transmute all the energy into love. So I do think that's why also the animals need to be included.
right, right. Yes, I hear what you're saying about suffering, and one has to ask. You said in the beginning you felt like we were here for joy and we just gotten away from the divine, but what about that child that ends up in a on the streets in Ethiopia that is still in that innocence, and I personally don't believe in randomness. If things are really random, what's the point, right? Suzanne, when I hear you talk about Unity Church, I always think of Suzanne Giesman. I'm sure you know Suzanne. She's been on my show because she's in anyway. But yeah, like, so what is how is that explained? It's all very interesting. So what do you have to say about that? About other, like the child who ends up, on
Oh
the
yeah.
streets in Ethiopia?
Yeah. I mean, I ask my podcast guests that all the time, especially the ones with the near death experiences. Um, I do know that we cannot explain this. I think what we can do is create models that help us feel comfortable with what could possibly be an explanation. I think people who've had near-death experiences will say, well, it's all planned, and the kid who's in Ethiopia planned to be there, and it's part of their karma, and it's part of their development. And I don't know if that's true. I just don't. I like to believe that that's true because it kind of feels good. It feels like everything's in order, and that it also placates me so I can be okay living my life. So it's
Mm,
it's pretty sneaky. I had a person on my podcast who was just kind of blew me away, Annika Lucas, and she really changed my life dramatically. I read her book. She changed my life before I read her book, but then I read her book, and I was really glad to get her on my podcast. She was involved in child sex slavery in Belgium in the 1970s. And this was sex slavery at the highest level. So this would be the highest level of political, the echelon, the people that we all would admire, who are our politicians and movie stars and those kinds of people. She doesn't name names, but her book catalogs 1 year of her life. And it's something that you would never want anyone ever to have to experience even 1 minute of. So how did she experience this and come out on the other side as a person who is whole? And all I know is when I see people who do that level of the spiritual work, um, I think it's like, wow, they make it possible for all of us. It's like if she can forgive, if she can heal, I should say, if she could heal, everyone can heal.
mhm,
So I don't think I'm really answering the question about why there's that kid in Ethiopia, but I do know that whatever that kid in Ethiopia experiences, um, I do believe sometimes it's there for us to be love and to do what we can to change that. So whatever that is for people, whether you're volunteering or whether you're um, uh, giving money or whatever, what can we do to bring love to that situation? And
mhm,
I also think there's opportunity for those people to heal through their trauma
mhm.
and show us.
I was pulling up. I don't know if you saw me looking around, but I study Edgar Casey, which
Yeah.
I talk about a lot on my show. And today, the thought for the day was, Know that the purpose for which each soul enters a material experience is that it may be as a light for others, which is so beautiful,
Yes.
which is exactly what I think what you are saying. And yeah, and back to near-death experiencers, I've had so many and researchers and the life review, that's what we're talking about too, in terms of, you mentioned people say that don't help one that they see as suffering or an animal, and what we learn from the life review is basically, the golden rule, but you actually see how your actions, you don't just see, but you dive deeply into their emotional realm, and that's the judgment, when you go. That changed my life when I as I've studied that so much. So okay, well, what has been your podcast that has just blown your mind away? You just mentioned Annika Lucas,
Yeah.
but anything, I saw that you did one on the Akashic Records and on Jesus. And are there any others talking about sort of like what we're talking about today, that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, my podcast is a wide range. It's a broad
Yeah, so
range.
it's
And so
mine.
I will sometimes I'll have like somebody who's very traditional Christian, and I'll have somebody who's left their religion, left Judaism. And, I have people who love Jesus and others who say Jesus didn't exist. And so I listen to all of it. And there's usually something worth listening to in every single one. And I'm like, wow, I'm so excited that I had this conversation. And what a job I have. I get to have these really interesting conversations. So I would say Annika Lucas is probably one of my biggest, most profound ones. I thought that my podcast with Renee King Sonnen was really interesting because it kind of ties into this. She's a woman who was she married a rancher, and she lived in Texas. And, he's a cattle rancher, so
Hmm.
that's his business, but then she started kind of venturing out, and she started kind of connecting with the cows, and she started kind of naming them, and she started seeing the divine in them. She saw them as individuals. She saw that she could communicate with them. And she was like, we can't send these to market. Now she began singing to them. She began really recognizing this is like a huge way of kind of evolving beyond. It's hard to see other people as divine, so we see other people as divine, see animals as divine. She started seeing these beings as divine beings of God, uh, divine creations of God. And so she told her husband, she's like, we're not sending them to market. He goes, what do you mean? We're cattlemen, So she says, oh my gosh, she got really close to having a divorce, but she says, we are not, you send those cattle to market, and I'm going to go take your money. I'm going to go buy them and bring them back here. Anyways, interesting story, because she was so surrounded and ingrained in this cattle culture, and she chose to go vegan, and so did he. And they over time, and they transformed their ranch into a farm sanctuary. So now all those cattle are living out their lives, and they're helping people to make this transition, helping chicken farmers make the transition to growing mushrooms, for example, because nobody really likes the business that much. I mean, I shouldn't say
Right.
nobody, but a lot of people don't. And so I love stories about transformation. I love stories about I was one way, but then, I kind of saw the light, kind of like Paul on the road where he turned from, Saul to Paul, and and say, you know what, I can be a completely different person, because we're so wired for that. And so I love those kinds of stories. I just talked to a guy recently, Dr. David Weil. He was so interesting. He was a transplant doctor who actually, for 10 years, he was head of the transplant division of Stanford Medicine Hospital, um, according to associated with Stanford University. And he, the role he was in, he was like, it's very easy when you're deciding what organs that go to what people and who's going to live and that kind of thing, that you start thinking that you're God, And so to see somebody kind of go from, I'm kind of God to, no, wait, I'm not God. God's working through me. And
Mm,
so I love those kinds of transformations as well. So
yeah, those are great
yeah.
stories. Yeah, that's funny. I was in the 4-H fair and we had pigs, and I remember I got so close to my pigs, and when I found out that the Hindhold Pig Market bought them, and I realized what it was, and it just broke my heart. Oh my gosh, I feel I can still feel that so deeply. I was just
Right.
beside
This is
myself.
this is so important of the 4-H kids. It's so important because they're right there. That is a loss of innocence right there.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
I don't blame your parents or your school or whoever got you in that. It's just what we do. But it's heartbreaking to the child who really got to know that animal.
mhm.
And it's kind of a betrayal, I think. It's a betrayal of the heart. And I'm not saying anyone's trying to do this or no one tried to hurt you, but you're hurt. And everybody who's in that situation would be hurt. It's because you're alive, it's because you're human, it's because you have a heart. And this is what I mean by the kind of the reclaiming of the innocence. You lost something on that day. Everybody who's even the first time we serve our kids like hot dogs, for example, they love little piggies, they love little lambs. They would not, slit the throat of a lamb. They never would do that. And so, the reclaiming of our innocence is to remember that who we were as children, we love that way.
Right,
And
right.
to go into, I do this with people who come to me for coaching, go into our psyche and find our inner child, find her at these age points where she was alone or suffering or sad, him or her, and just say, hi, I'm your grown-up self. And I want you to know that everything turns out okay. And I'm here to hold your pain. And, you're right. Love is the answer. It's a
Mhm.
very integrating experience.
Yeah. We do that a lot in shamanism, and it's called a soul retrieval, bringing those
Oh, yeah.
those those little pieces of your
Yeah. Those
soul that
parts.
have been,
Hmm.
yeah, that have been shattered, and bringing them back. So, well, we need to wrap it up, but tell us a little bit about this, retreat that you're getting ready to have.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me time for that. This is the third year. And this was actually something that was a little bit of a download for me. I'm a unity minister, and our founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, started unity based on it's a healing and prayer ministry where so much faith in God, knowing that we are divine beings. And so, therefore, we are also healthy and that we don't bring illness to us. So, Myrtle Fillmore healed herself through prayer of tuberculosis. And then they really started a prayer ministry. And then they kind of expanded from there, but it was kind of centered on that. At some point, it was pointed out to them that they had dead bodies on on their plates, and like, why are there dead bodies around? It was their printer of their magazine, who was a Seventh-day Adventist, said that. And so it clicked in them. And they're like, well, we're all about universal love and peace and harmony and joy and bringing about, a loving planet. We're out of alignment. So they became ethical vegetarians at the time. And Charles Fillmore used to kind of preach this from the pulpit. And it was really about, they were very clear that if we're going to love universally, we have to love universally. If we want world peace, we'll never have world peace as long as we're slaughtering animals. And they had a food company where they sold meat alternatives, and they bound their Bibles in a leather alternative. And this is all in the early 1900s. So I feel that I have been inspired by the spirits of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore to bring this teaching back to unity. And many people are resistant because they like their bacon. And that's just, it's just kind of an ego thing that takes a little will to change. But I decided to have this retreat every year at Unity Village to kind of create this place of energy where we're in conversation about how do we make a world that works for all beings. I'm bringing Renee King Sonnen, who I just mentioned, the cattle rancher's wife. She's a guest speaker this year. We have workshops, we have talks, we have lots of connection time, we have music, and it's all about and it's not a vegan retreat. I call it whole planet spirituality. So it's really about kind of restoring ourselves to that Edenic, original kind of nature, and everyone's invited. Last year, at least 20% were who I call curious omnivores. They're people just curious about what is this lifestyle. And others are vegan activists who are way on the path and they're out there, protesting and all that, and others are kind of in the middle. We have a very, very wide spectrum of people, but it's such a loving environment. So anybody who's just curious, no one will make you wrong. Everyone's so excited you're there because we're all kind of on the same train, trying to bring more love, harmony, peace, and wholeness to our planet. And we want to try to do it through our own actions. So this year's theme is Peace Begins with Me. So this is about not looking out there about what's not peaceful, what's wrong, wars, blah, 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 but what is going on inside me? Where am I out of alignment? Because where I'm out of alignment, where I'm saying one thing, doing another, that causes a lot of dissonance, discord in me. And it's a non-peaceful feeling within me. And that comes out in all sorts of ways. I project it onto people. So we're going to be looking at those kinds of things. How can we be the most peaceful people within us so that we can be peacemakers on the planet? And it does impact so many areas of our lives. So that's what my retreat's about. It's October 19th to the 22nd. And if anyone's interested, you can learn about it at thespiritualforum.org/retreat. Would love to have you. It's such a beautiful place too. Unity Village, prayer has been happening there for over 125 years. The vibration of just love and prayer is just so palpable. Plus there's 120 acres of walking paths, and it's just a beautiful place.
Sounds amazing. Well, that information will be in our show notes too. And if people do want to find you, how would they go about doing that?
Yes, so my website is thespiritualforum.org. You can email me at revcarolsaunders@gmail.com. I'm open for anything. I have 3 prayer calls every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Tuesday, we pray for the animals and the awakening of humanity. On Wednesday, we pray for children who are victims of trafficking or abuse. And on Friday, we pray for our nation. So anyone's invited to do that at 7:30 in the morning Central Time.
Great. Well, Carol, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and for your passion. And yeah, we'll be sure all that information gets in the show notes and out about your retreat this coming October. It's right around the corner.
It's right around the corner. Yeah, and I'll be happy to come on again and talk about Jesus.
Great, great. Okay, big topic. Okay, well, thank you so much, and
It is
you
a
have
big
a great
topic.
rest of the day.
Thank you, Marla. I appreciate
Okay,
it.
bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
That was fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that was fun. I'll let you know when it airs, and yeah, and good luck with your retreat.
Thank you so much. And I'll connect with you too about the work you're doing, because it sounds so interesting too.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I've been on my transformation. My son passed 6 years ago.
Oh
Actually, this is
my.
a terrible month for me. But I've really changed dramatically, But anyway, it's funny that you bring up the transplant surgeon because I worked at UCSF in transplant. So I'm sure the guys I know and girls, they all know each other, and it is kind of interesting how they get that kind of godlike. I think a lot
Yeah.
of surgeons do
I think so
that.
too. That's why I love this guy. He was so humble.
Yeah,
He had become so humble and so authentic about his errors. And I love
right.
having people on who's so raw and going,
Oh,
gosh, I F
absolutely.
life up so much. I did this. And the successful surgeon, I think I was just really interested in him because I thought he might be a little cocky. I read his book and I thought he might be a little cocky, and he wasn't at all. And
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think if I've had anybody on my show that's cocky. I think more than that, it's like sometimes it's just not your vision. It's not the message you're trying to
Right,
get
right,
out to the
right.
world, and it's kind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Oh, I mean, I'm interviewing this woman this afternoon because we've really been trying to talk a lot about the ritual program that I'm working with. So my assistant has been reaching out to all these people, and she's about blindfolding children and having them do intuitive development, which is really great. I mean, she loves doing it. It's really great, but it's kind of like, so what am I going to talk to her about?
Yeah, well, you might have felt that way about me, actually.
No.
Yeah.
No. And anyway, so that there's that part of it, but that rarely happens. I usually get off to and just think many times, well, that changed my life.
The guy I talked to yesterday, I was walking around in kind of a stupor for hours afterwards because it was so rich.
I
I
know.
mean,
And
it was
so
so much.
vulnerable.
Yeah, and it was so much. And he did a lot of talking. I hardly talked at all. But